Hello and welcome to the CUFI UK podcast for Zion's sake. My name is Alastair. I'm with Alex.
Hello.
And we would like to welcome you as we discuss some of the latest issues relating to Israel and the Jewish people. And we have some very interesting topics to talk about today, haven't we, Alex?
Yeah, well, we're going to be talking about the Oscars, which is slightly different for this podcast, but we're going to be talking about the controversy surrounding pin badges at the Oscars.
That's right. And we're also going to be discussing inflation.
Yep.
That's right. The inflated figures which are being produced by Hamas and relayed all around the world.
Yep.
And we're going to get to the bottom of that and reveal the truth.
Yep.
But let's first begin with the Oscars. I'm pleased to say that I didn't watch the Oscars live, but it is a very important topic because some of the things which happened there was really a staging of anti-Israel messaging, which the media has picked up on. The pin badge then.
Yeah.
And Billie Eilish.
Yeah. By the way, sorry,
Yeah.
I will just say, you actually just hit something on the head there. It's been picked up far more than the awards, the movies, anything like that. Actually, the pin badges have become the top story of the Oscars, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I mean, Billie Eilish, who's a singer, Mark Ruffalo, who's an actor, and also actor Rami Youssef, they all wore this red circular pin badge. And you're right, the messaging behind that has been picked up, and there's lots of reports explaining or trying to explain what it actually represents.
Yeah.
And the claim is that it is in support of a ceasefire. However, when you get to the roots of what the pin badge means, if you look closely, it is a red hand.
Yeah.
A red hand, which actually those who know what it means are saying that it's because Israel has blood on their hands. That's what their accusation is. But it's even more sinister than that. And that's bad. But it's even more sinister than that because it relates to a terrorist attack in the year 2000 during the Second Intifada, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So, like you said, there is historically a representation for a red hand, meaning that someone has blood on their hands. Well, in this case, it actually means the same thing, but the blood on the hands is actually blood on Palestinian hands when they murdered Jews. And as you said, it has unfortunately become a symbol of Palestinian resistance, of regular Palestinians standing up against Israel. And it goes back to the year 2000, during the Second Intifada, known as the Al-Aqsa Intifada to the Palestinians, where 2 Israeli soldiers were lynched by a mob of Palestinian civilians. Now,
they actually went into... It was a mistake that they took a wrong turn. That was the only thing that they did.
Yeah, exactly. And they weren't... And by the way, I said soldiers. It was their first day of duty. They were not dressed as soldiers. They were not armed. So effectively, they were civilians.
Yes.
They were heading to a base, and they hadn't even had basic training yet. So they were heading to the base for the first day of training because they'd been called up as reservists to actually, stand as soldiers to defend Israel from the Intifada. Because at this time, Hamas and Palestinian terrorists from other factions were blowing themselves up and, suicide bombings, stabbing attacks, all these different things against civilians. So Israel was having to defend itself. Well, these 2 soldiers or 2 people, they literally were in a civilian car. They took a wrong turn, went into Ramallah, and unfortunately, they were met by a crowd of around 1,000 people who were attending a funeral. They were identified as being Israeli. They were then arrested by the police force who held them in the police station, and the crowd was being fired up, basically, incited into murdering these 2 Jewish men. One of them, by the way, was a toy salesman. The other was a delivery driver, so they definitely weren't, any big threat to them or anything. And the mob, the crowd, overwhelmed the police force, pushed their way in, and murdered them in a very brutal fashion. They were killed with their bare, the Palestinians used their bare hands and knives. And I mean, there's a report from a British journalist, actually, Mark Seeger, who said the lynching was the most horrible thing that I have ever seen, and I have reported from the Congo, Kosovo, many bad places. I know the Palestinians, are not all like this, and I'm a very forgiving person, but I'll never forget this. It was murder of the most barbaric kind. And I'm just going to say a very gruesome thing here. He said, when I think about it, I see the man's head all smashed. I know that I'll have nightmares for the rest of my life. So the way that this crowd has descended on these two men simply for being Jews, for being Israelis, and just brutally slaughtered.
They were dismembered.
Yeah.
They were tortured, and there's an image which is available on the internet, which shows one of the terrorists hanging out of the window with his arms, with his hands raised, with Jewish blood on his hands, in celebration of the murder that had taken place inside.
Yeah, and the crowd outside all cheered and celebrated.
And then so the red hands became synonymous with that symbol of so-called Palestinian resistance.
Yeah.
So, back to the Oscars.
Yep.
On Oscars night, these celebrities wore pin badges, which we don't know what they believe. I mean, some might have believed that they were just standing up to a ceasefire.
Yeah.
Others would have understood the red hand to being blood on the hands of Israel, their accusation. But actually, it was a symbol of Jewish blood on the hands of terrorists. Think about that for a moment.
I know.
And then there were other celebrities who wore yellow ribbons.
Yeah.
Yellow ribbons stood for solidarity with the Israeli hostages and the calling for their release.
Yeah.
I understand that singers like, singer Billie Eilish, Mark Ruffalo, and the others might not have fully understood the connotations, or we can talk about that, whether or not they did or not. However, they deliberately chose a side and deliberately chose not to wear a yellow ribbon.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, if you're calling for peace and you want peace on both sides and you want innocent people saved on both sides, what about the Jewish hostages? Because everyone should agree that those hostages should be released by Hamas. The other thing you're saying, why a red hand? I mean, the Israeli symbol with the yellow ribbon, that doesn't show support for Israel. It doesn't show support for the IDF. It doesn't show support for anything. It just literally says free the hostages.
It's not a politicized symbol.
Exactly. Yeah, it's focusing purely on the victims. Whereas the red hand, it's kind of like they could have put a Palestinian flag, or they could have put a dove. Like you could have shown some sign of something.
A dove would have been a good thing.
Would have been a good
peace.
Thing. Yeah. Peace or something like that. But instead, they chose the red hand, which we know from Palestinian protests. Like there's people in the streets of London in the past over different times who have used the red hand symbology to identify with that uprising, they say uprising against Israel. Yes. And so, it's,
Mark Ruffalo, though, does have a track record of being staunchly anti-Israel.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and he actually, in the past he's accused Israel of apartheid, he's accused Israel more recently of genocide. He, even with the red hand symbol, he put that on his Instagram, he put a post up. I mean, he didn't say, obviously, he doesn't support Hamas as far as I know, but he put there that he wants, peace and ceasefire, that sort of thing. But he obviously went a bit further than some of the other celebrities, because he has in the past. He is an anti-Israel activist, or a pro-Palestinian activist, in my mind. And so I do think that he probably has, if any of them would have known more, more of the connotations behind it, he probably would have been the most likely to know.
And yes, and whether or not they understood the reference, I think there's a spiritual dynamic here where siding and having a moral, or not having moral clarity on these issues do lead people to make stupid choices.
Yeah.
And actually, unfortunately, there are those who are also taking advantage of some of those who do have a platform, and it's so sad that
Yeah.
what people were talking about the next day regarding the Oscars was about the pin badges, because they deliberately wanted to get their messaging across.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the only statement regarding the current conflict that was made. Shall we just refer to that now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So there is a film which won an Oscar called The Zone of Interest.
Yep.
It's a film about the Holocaust, and the director is Jewish. And he said a statement which was, "Right now, we stand here as men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation which has led to conflict for so many innocent people. Whether the victims of October the 7th in Israel or the ongoing attack on Gaza, or the victims of this dehumanization, how do we resist?" Very loaded comment there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a shame, really, because, I mean, obviously he's Jewish. He made a film about the Holocaust, and then he's seemingly, he's not seemingly, he is making that connection between Israel. He's basically saying Israel's carrying out atrocities and that the Holocaust is being used to protect them from those alleged atrocities.
And what a perfect opportunity that would have been. Here's a film about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And yet look what happened on the 7th of October.
Yeah. And also look what's ongoing. I mean, the thing is, the root of all of this is anti-Semitism, right?
Yes.
The lynching of those two men in 2000, where the blood on the hands, anti-Semitism. The Hamas attacks in 2007, on 7th of October last year, 2023, the same thing, anti-Semitism. They broke into Israel, the Hamas terrorists broke into Israel and just murdered every Jew they could find. That was their aim.
They could find.
Exactly.
And if he had been, I mean, I say this with sincerely, if he had been there in that kibbutz, then sadly and shockingly, Hamas would not have differentiated between an Oscar film director and any other Jewish person that was there.
Exactly. And this is the crux of it. It's like, I think, and this is why a lot of people don't have wisdom on this or don't have the insight, because what we're seeing now, whether it is the bias in the media, whether it is the the hatred at the UN, or whether it is this incident where a Jewish man is even shedding off his Jewishness, sort of thing, to stand in solidarity with those who are deeply anti-Semitic. And this is the thing. It's like, I know we look at the numbers and we are all concerned when innocent people are killed, right? But you cannot get away from the root of this issue, which is anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is driving all of these things. And unfortunately, he's allowed himself to be driven by an anti-Semitic movement, which has compromised his view on this. And I think it goes back even to with the other celebrities we were talking about, where if you look at Billie Eilish, she won an Oscar for a song for the Barbie movie, and the founders of Barbie are Jewish.
Does it matter?
Does it matter? Well, I think it does matter.
Yes,
it does matter. Yeah. But the thing is, the Jewish founders themselves experienced anti-Semitism. Their parents fled the Nazis, for example, and they were concerned about anti-Semitism within America.
I think a lot of people listening would not be aware of the Jewish roots of Barbie.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Barbie and Ken were literally named after Jewish children. The two children, I'll just pull up the names for you. So it was Elliot Handler was the dad, who and Ruth Handler. So Ruth and Elliot Handler, they founded Mattel. Ruth Handler made the Barbie dolls. Her daughter was called Barbara. Her son was called Kenneth. Ken and Barbie. That's how they were made. And so Elliot Handler, his name was actually changed from Izzy, to Elliot, because his mum was worried about anti-Semitism, because they'd fled anti-Semitism in Europe, and they were worried that there would be anti-Semitism in in America. And actually, Mattel comes from Elliot, and there's another man who I can't remember the name of the man, but anyway, there's a combination of the names of them. So actually, Mattel wouldn't even be called Mattel if it wasn't for anti-Semitism changing his name, right? And just a tiny little side note on this: talk about a power couple, right? Elliot Handler and his wife Ruth. Ruth Handler created Barbie. Elliot Handler created Hot Wheels.
Oh,
so
wow.
the two of the biggest toys, played by boys and girls.
Yeah.
I bought both of those toys for my children. Were created by two Jews who, who likely would have been standing with Israel right now.
Yes.
And on the flip side, then go back to Mark Ruffalo.
Yes.
He is most famous for his role as the superhero, the Incredible Hulk, Bruce Banner. And again, the Incredible Hulk was created by two Jews, Stan Lee and Mark Kirby. Both of them were Jewish. Mark Kirby himself was extremely pro-Israel. His daughter even has the Heroes Foundation. And straight after the 7th of October attack, she put an Israel flag up there and said, I stand with Israel just like my grandfather would. Sorry, I said daughter. I meant to say granddaughter. Just like my grandfather would have, because he was a staunch Zionist. And Stan Lee's family was staunch Zionist. In fact, his dad would berate him, saying, "You're not being pro-Israel enough. You need to be more pro-Israel." Well, Stan Lee and Mark Kirby. Stan Lee was the writer. Mark Kirby was the artist. They created superheroes like Spider-Man, the X-Men, all the Avengers, all these things. And they even created a Jewish superhero called Sabra, and she literally is in the colours of the Israeli flag with the Star of David and everything. And it's causing a bit of a problem, actually, for Hollywood, because they're trying to adapt her for a movie in the coming years, and they're basically taking away the Israeli flag and the Jewishness of it because it's too pro-Israel.
Wow.
So anyway,
I appreciate all of those facts, because we understand the amazing contribution that the Jewish people have had to so many things that we do enjoy in our lives, and the fact that childhoods for decades. If we go back to Hot Wheels and Barbie, and you mentioned about the hero films, superhero films. All of those things have gone from a number of generations, and yet there are Jewish people that are behind that, but also it comes from a defiance against the anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And yet, despite the anti-Semitism, they have contributed so much to the things that children and we as adults have, enjoyed as part of our lives.
Yeah.
And that's a really, really good link. And then there's also, you've just reminded me, or you've prompted me, that actually the first video game was invented by a Jewish survivor of the Holocaust. Escaped the Holocaust. Ralph Baer, I think it is. He invented the Magnavox Odyssey, which was the forerunner of gaming consoles. So again, that's another thing. A person who survived the Holocaust, a Jewish man, and of course that has brought so much. So anyway, I think we need to get back.
Yeah, back on topic.
But you make a good point.
Yeah, well, the point I'm trying to make actually is not about not trying to get people to buy Hot Wheels and Barbies or anything. It's actually to say the celebrities that were chosen, or that chose to wear these symbols, are high up celebrities. Billie Eilish won an Oscar. She stood there on stage with holding an Oscar with this red pin badge. Now, she didn't mention anything about the red pin badge in her speech, unlike the gentleman who won the Oscar for the Holocaust movie, but she clearly had it there, and it's visible on pictures. Mark Ruffalo, he was chosen, not that he was chosen, sorry. He is a high-up celebrity. He was nominated, I should say, for an Oscar. So he was in the spotlight. He had this badge on. These are high-up people, right? And the problem is, going back to the sort of the history and the Jewish history behind it, Mark Ruffalo wouldn't even be where he is today if it wasn't for the Incredible Hulk and that position there. It's the second highest grossing movie ever, is one of the Avengers movies. And I think it's Avengers Endgame. And like he got a lot of fame and fortune from that, based off of the legacy of these Jews who made these characters, were pro-Israel, were pro the IDF even, and about defending the Jewish people. In fact, there's inspiration for, you know, some of the superheroes came from how the IDF fought against anti-Semitism. There's a lot of good versus evil sort of dynamics here. And then on the flip side, you have these people standing with the anti-Semites. You know, they're standing with the people who are calling for Israel's destruction and trying to destroy the Jewish people, even though they think that they are standing there to stop bloodshed and stop Israel killing civilians and all this thing. Ultimately, what they're doing is they're standing with those who seek the destruction of Israel, and yet they're standing on the, you know, they're only on that platform because of the help that's been given to them from these Jews who were standing against anti-Semitism. I don't know if I
no, absolutely.
Yeah. And by the way, I mean, I would say, obviously, Mark Ruffalo, he's acted in other movies. You know, Billie Eilish was famous before she did this song for Barbie, so it's not like this has catapulted them up there and they should be thankful, and this is the only thing that made them famous. But I'm just saying, it's like, it is a shame that that what they're standing on there, the legacy of the people who actually were victims themselves of anti-Semitism, and now, instead of standing up against anti-Semitism, they've stood on the side of those who are perpetrating anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
So, yeah. One thing I do think, though, is important is that, you know, obviously we've got our viewpoints here on this, but actually I think it's good we hear from a Jewish perspective on this situation, especially directing the comments towards the Jewish man who stood on stage and basically, you know, went against Israel in a strong way. And so it's this 94-year-old Holocaust survivor, and he said, I'm 94 years old and the only member of 105 souls in my family to survive the Holocaust. I miraculously survived nearly 3 years in the hell of Auschwitz and 1 year in the hell of Buchenwald. I watched in anguish Sunday night when I heard you use the platform of the Oscars ceremony to equate Hamas's maniacal brutality against innocent Israelis with Israel's difficult but necessary self-defense in the face of Hamas's ongoing barbarity. Your comments were factually inaccurate and morally indefensible. The occupation, in quotes, of which you speak has nothing to do with the Holocaust. The Jewish people's existence and right to live in the land of Israel predates the Holocaust by hundreds of years. Today's political and geographic landscape is the direct result of wars started by past Arab leaders who refused to accept Jewish people as their neighbours in our historic homeland. Now that several Arab countries are making peace with Israel because security and prosperity are better for all people, Iran and its terrorist proxies started another war, abetted by too many who, through naivety or malice, blame the occupation, in quotes. Worse is that you chose to use the Holocaust to validate your personal opinion. You made a Holocaust movie and won an Oscar, and you are Jewish. Good for you. But it is disgraceful that you presume to speak for the 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children, who were murdered solely because of their Jewish identity. And it is disgraceful for you to presume to speak for those of us who personally saw the world stand silent as our mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, grandparents, aunts, uncles and cousins were murdered. We actually had nowhere to go, no possible place of refuge. No country would accept us, even though world leaders knew full well that thousands of Jews were being murdered every day. There was no Jewish nation to which we could flee. You should be ashamed of yourself for using Auschwitz to criticize Israel.
You don't need to add to that.
Don't need to add to that at all.
That says it all.
You said everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Alex, thank you for closing with that, because that is a very, very poignant challenge, and we will leave it there. Torch magazine is something that we have available for people to read some of this information which we're sharing. I mean, many of our Torch magazines have explained the Jewish roots, of some of the things which we are probably not aware have Jewish roots. But the magazine's purpose is to be able to share the truth as well. And our latest one has just been released. It is available now to read online. by subscribing to www.cufi.org.uk/torch. And we also have it available in print form for those living in the UK. This issue is titled Bearing Witness. We have a very important article, I think, explaining the gravity of the attacks which took place on the 7th of October, the context, the detail, the things which we all need to know about and never forget, but also to communicate as witnesses of what took place in our lifetime, the largest the largest massacre, the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. We also have an article about the countering the rise in anti-Semitism in Britain. We have an article about the two-state delusion, and we would just encourage those who have received it to pass it on to others, or to request more copies to share with those who are at your church or prayer meeting, because we are just really, really eager to get the truth out far and wide.
Yeah, exactly.
And so please, if you don't already receive this magazine, either by email or in print form, then please do go to the link that is provided below and sign up to receive your copy.
Yeah, it's free.
It is absolutely free. We don't want to put anything in the way of you being able to access our magazine.
Yep.
What we do say is that, of course, it does cost us here at CUFI to print these resources, and especially if you are requesting a multiple quantity to share with others, then we would invite you to make a donation to contribute towards the cost of doing so. We have some churches which request large quantities and hand them out to every member of the congregation. And so if that is something that you can do at your church, then please do get in touch.
Yep.
We produce these as a very important tool for communicating the need to stand with Israel, the need to stand with the Jewish people, and also to encourage and edify our supporters. Because we appreciate that standing with Israel is the right thing to do. It's not always the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
And so we want to encourage one another and equip ourselves in that mission.
Yep, definitely. And also, we are sending these to every single member of Parliament in the UK. So your MP, if you're watching in the UK, your MP will receive one of these magazines. They're actually being hand delivered this week. So do pray about that, because we want them to read it. Obviously, it's going to be hand delivered to them. They may just look at it and throw it in the bin or whatever, but we do want them to read it. And that means everyone from Jeremy Corbyn to George Galloway, all the way up to the Prime Minister himself, will be receiving one of these copies. So do pray that it will change people's hearts, challenge people, and give them, because it is the truth that's being given to them, and it's going to our elected officials. And ultimately, we want to turn our nation back to God, and it's got, further away from God over the years, and we want it to, make that change. And, we hope that this will impact our nation in a way. The work we're doing here, we want it to impact the nation because we know it's a good cause, a godly cause. And so, do just pray about that, because, we want it to make an impact.
That's right. Well, following last week's podcast, Alex has an apology to make to the United Nations.
That's right.
This is because Alex made the claim that the UN condemned Hamas in the days after the 7th of October. But Alex is going to give a statement of apology to the United Nations for an error that he made and regrets. And so, Alex, I'm going to hand it over to you to make your apology to the UN.
Okay. Well, United Nations, I am sorry. I apologize because I made a mistake. I said last week that you had condemned Hamas for its brutal murder of over 1,200 Israeli men, women, and children. I was wrong. I should have had more faith in the fact that you continue to disappoint humanity by not condemning Hamas. You continue to stand on the side of the terrorists of Hamas rather than with Israel and the Jewish people and the victims of their brutal massacre. So, UN, I apologize for giving you too much credit when you do not deserve that credit, because...
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
I think that was brave.
Yep.
And it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. So basically...
so John, to now explain why you were so wrong.
Yeah, I'll explain. So last week I actually said the UN had condemned Hamas in the days following the massacre, and I was wrong. What happens normally is when there is a United Nations Security Council meeting, there's 15 members of the UN Security Council, and basically if one of the 5 members vetoes a resolution, that resolution does not get passed. So when I read the news reports that this meeting had taken place and that no one had vetoed it, my instant thought was, oh, it's passed. And I mistook that for what had happened, because what really happened was the United Nations Security Council met behind closed doors and they were meeting to release a statement on the Hamas massacre. But when they do these statements, what they actually have to have is all 15 members have to be united in their vote. So they all have to vote yes, otherwise it doesn't go through. Whereas when they meet at the UN Security Council in open and they make their resolutions, actually they don't need unanimous support for that resolution. It can pass 12-3 or whatever. And so I just misunderstood the situation. And so when I read the reports that no one had vetoed it, which I think might have even been a crafty way of newspapers reporting that they hadn't not condemned Hamas, sort of thing. I mistook it. So what really happened was the United Nations Security Council failed to condemn Hamas,
which is shocking.
We do know that there were 2 nations who were either not opposed to it, but they abstained, so they didn't vote in favor of it. One of them being Russia. Apparently Russia wasn't happy with the wording, and so they didn't want to condemn Hamas. I'm not 100% sure why, but I know the US spoke out against them. But because it's behind closed doors, they actually couldn't name them by name. They said, you'll know who it is, who we're talking about, kind of thing. China actually came out saying that they wanted to have the wording to say all civilians, not just Israeli civilians. And so what they were trying to do is conflate 2 things. Bearing in mind, this was just one day after the atrocity. By that point, Israel had just lost over 1,000 civilians, had over 200 kidnapped, and the only people Israeli forces had killed were terrorists who invaded their country. Right? They hadn't even done retaliatory strikes yet.
So this is absolutely shocking. What you're saying is then that the UN have never condemned Hamas, ever.
As far as I can tell, they've never condemned Hamas.
That's appalling.
I know, even when in a single day they murder over 1,000 Jews, they've still not been condemned.
Yes, and yet it was coined, as you said, it was coined in a way that led us to believe that there had been a condemnation.
And it might have just been me misunderstanding.
No, I don't think it was.
But,
I don't think it was. I think that I remember at the time, because we have certainly... we've probably even referred to the fact that the UN, did make some statement, but an actual condemnation. Now, I don't think it was just you. I think it was deliberate, misleading, and it just again shows the the appalling actions of the UN.
Yeah, and just think about it as well. Like, they had to do this behind closed doors. Normally, when they're condemning Israel, they're doing it out in the open, in front of everyone, blame the Jews kind of thing. When it comes to Hamas, they have to cower away behind closed doors. I mean, it's just pathetic. It really is pathetic.
Yes.
But yeah, obviously, last week I said that the UN condemned Hamas, and obviously I just wanted to clarify the UN hasn't. They continue to disappoint us, and it is disgraceful.
Well, speaking about Hamas, Alex, and the figures which are being reported, because one thing to note with the calls for a ceasefire, such as that we see demonstrated at the Oscars, is that they are reacting to these large quoted numbers.
Yeah.
and almost giving they feel that huge number is giving validity to their cause, to their stand.
Yeah.
Obviously, the number 31,000, which is being cited right now. I mean, that's a big number.
Yeah.
But that is the basis for which the ceasefire really is being given volume. Even the United States president, he first said back in October, he said, when the number, by the way, was only at 6,500, he said, "I have no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about how many people are killed." And then just in an interview on Sunday, President Biden cited the 30,000 figure, which is now past the 31,000. He said, "You cannot have another 30,000 dead as a consequence of pursuing Hamas." So this figure is important because it is what the movement which is calling for a ceasefire is framing its argument on.
Yeah.
But a report has come out this week which is questioning what I think we already suspect.
Yeah.
And that is that the number is highly doubtful, not least because the figures, which are, by the way, provided by the United Nations, which are based on the figures which are provided by the Gaza ministry run by Hamas.
Yeah.
These are Hamas numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? And a report came out this week, which is scrutinizing the figures from various angles.
And these are experts who are looking at the numbers.
Yeah. This is an article. It's been published in by the Tablet magazine, and this professor has been analysing these figures. And the first thing that calls into question is the casualty rate increase. Now, we have a graph that we're going to put up on the screen, and these are figures that Hamas themselves are reporting, and they've been put together. As I say, they're figures from Hamas, provided by the UN, and they have been put together in this graph. And one thing you will notice is the regularity, what he says is the metronomical linearity of it. You can see that the increase gradients are the same.
Yeah.
Their increments are the same.
Yep. Doesn't matter what operations Israel were doing that day, how many bombs they dropped or anything, the same number of people die every day.
There's absolutely no variations. We know that Israel's operations have potentially, could have varied depending on what they did. So some days there would have been more, some days there would have been less. But just look at that direct line on the screen.
Yeah. Unlike any other war in history, by the way.
Yeah.
So
that calls into suspicion that these figures are being,
they're being doctored.
They're being doctored, basically.
Yeah. They are fake. Hamas is lying, apparently. So, yeah.
Well, Hamas is lying, not apparently about it.
Sorry.
Hamas lying. But
sorry, I missaid that. What I meant to say was Hamas, known for lying, are lying again.
Yeah.
They're living up to their name, aren't they?
So, yes. So, this is right. Now, the other thing to make mention is that the figures provided by Hamas themselves also they include child and women casualties. Now, what you would expect is that the figures of child deaths should track women deaths, because if it's going to be women killed, you would expect the same sort of number of children. But what instead we have is that we have some days where there are all women and other days when there are all children.
Yeah.
So there is actually an inconsistency.
And never a grown man, by the look of
it. Well, that comes on to the next point. Okay. Yeah. So there's the daily variation in strikes, but also the professor notes that child casualties should track women casualties. He says, perhaps what is happening in the Gaza ministry is releasing fake daily numbers that vary too little because they do not have a clear understanding of the behavior of naturally occurring numbers. And the other thing is the number of men. Okay, according to, despite this figure being 30,000, right? If the number is 30,000, with the breakdown of women and children, there are not enough men that are being reported as being killed to actually make these viable numbers. Yeah. For example, Hamas claims that 70% of the casualties are women and children. That is far higher than the numbers in any other earlier conflicts with Israel, by the way.
Yeah.
But with 70% of casualties being women and children, and with 25% of the population being adult males, this is what he concludes. He says Hamas is reporting not only that 70% of casualties are women and children, but also that 20% are fighters.
Okay.
Now think about 70% plus 20 and 90%. Okay. That is not possible unless Israel is somehow not killing non-combatant men, or else Hamas is claiming that almost all the men in Gaza are Hamas fighters. So in other words, there are not enough non-combatant men that are being killed at the same time as the women and children.
Yeah, exactly. And we know that Hamas lies about these numbers when it comes to the number of fighters killed. And they do it for a number of reasons. They want to try and show that first of all, they want to smear Israel. They want Israel to look bad. They want everyone to believe that it's women and children who are dying. But there is precedent in this, because if we look back at some Hamas figures from the past, the Operation Cast Lead, which took place in 2008-2009, so it was a 3-week armed conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza from 27th of December 2008 to the 18th of January 2009. Between 1,166 people to 1,417 Palestinians were killed, right? Bearing in mind, these numbers, even now, after this is 14, 15 years ago, they still don't have an accurate number on how many people died. At the time, Hamas were claiming that of these 1,166 people, only 48 of them were Hamas fighters.
Wow.
So just think about, even more of a thing. And at that time, the UN had a little bit of common sense and basically said, we can't really trust anything that's coming out of there because they're not telling us statistics. Well, it took them a year later that Hamas admitted that it was between 600 and 700 of those killed were Hamas fighters. Now, bearing in mind, the IDF all along were claiming that it was, their number is 709 were Hamas fighters. Hamas said no, it was only 48. A year later, because what they did is they were trying to say, we only lost 48 fighters. They could only kill our women and children because we're such great fighters, whereas they lost more soldiers than we lost. The reality was Israel was targeting Hamas, targeting terror, and the ratio there, if you go by the low number of 1,166, means that for every one combatant killed, 0.6 civilians were killed. So less than 1-to-1 ratio, which is unheard of in modern warfare.
Well, looking at the ratio now, Alex, because Israel's put the number of terrorists killed in Gaza at 12,000. But this report concludes that if that number proves to be even measly accurate, I think he's referring to the Hamas figure of 30,000, then the ratio of non-combatant casualties to the combatants is remarkably low, at most 1.4 to 1, and perhaps as low as 1 to 1.
Yeah.
Now, that is a remarkable ratio. We know, we say all the time that, that Israel has one of the lowest combatant to non-combatant ratios in the world militarily.
Yep.
And we know that, and it is even, I say even less, because we place this expectation on our own forces, don't we?
Yeah.
We believe in the good of our own forces, but it is even lower than the British and the US forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, which I think was around 3...
No, it's 4.5.
Oh, 4.5. So that's 4.5 civilians to every one combatant.
Yeah, exactly. And so even in the worst case scenarios, Israel is not getting anywhere close to how we were. And this goes back to as well, like how President Biden, I think, is being influenced by these false reports and false numbers, just like many other people are, the UN and so forth. Because back in October, he was saying, we stand fully with Israel. They have every right to go in there. And then now he's saying, another 30,000 is too many. Well, when 9/11 happened, over 3,000 Americans were killed on that day. The war that resulted from that, the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, resulted in over 1 million people dying, far more than 30,000 we've seen in Gaza. And like I said, the ratio was 4.5 civilians to 1 combatant. It was far outweighed with all this. But again, this is the propaganda. Let's go back to this 2008 Operation Cast Lead numbers I was telling you. When I went onto the Wikipedia page to see just some overall information about it, one thing that caught my eye is it said Operation Cast Lead, also known as the Gaza Massacre. Think about that. One of the most pinpointed, they literally killed more combatants than civilians, which is unheard of for any military. The UN estimates 9 civilians killed for 1 terrorist or 1 combatant. In this case, they killed 0.6 civilians for every 1 terrorist. And it's known as the Gaza Massacre. This is why we have it is a propaganda war. Yeah. This is why Israel is apparently committing genocide. This is why Israel's, apparently committing massacres and atrocities, because they're not using correct terminology to phrase these things. They've reshaped the meaning of words and the discourse around these conflicts to paint Israel in a bad light, because it is a spiritual attack. It is propaganda against Israel. Yep. And it is exactly the same as what the Nazis did when they, like Goebbels and his propaganda against the Jews. And we hear it all the time. I was reading something this week about Goebbels where he was saying that, back then in the 1930s, he was saying it, where he was saying, when we mark them with these yellow stars, we're giving them a courtesy because we're showing them we're decent people. But anything that happens to the Jewish people is their fault. They have brought on themselves and they deserve it. Well, look at what we've seen from the pro-Palestinian side. Israel is the occupier. They have no rights. Everything that happens, they deserve. I mean, me and you, we were discussing earlier in the week about some stickers that had been found in New York where it said, "Rape is resistance." I mean, they would...
With a Palestinian flag.
Yeah, with a Palestinian flag behind it. And it said, by any means necessary, we have to defeat the occupation. And it's like this mentality that Israel is to blame, Jews are to blame, they are guilty, they have no rights, all these sorts of things. It's like the same spirit of anti-Semitism that was there back in the 1930s, but in 1945 is there today. And it is being perpetrated willingly or unwillingly or unwittingly by, for example, the celebrities at the Oscars, by Hamas, as they do this, by the UN, by the President of America himself, as he gives in to these statistics, by our own country. We've got politicians here who are believing the lies of Hamas and are blaming Israel, when what Israel is doing is trying to wipe out an evil force from the earth. And
Hamas.
They're trying to wipe out Hamas. And the reason that the voices against Israel are getting so strong now is because Israel is more successful against Hamas than it's ever been before. And, Hamas is against the ropes. It is in trouble.
Yes.
And every voice and force is coming out against Israel right now.
Because they're not allowed to win this war.
Israel's not allowed. And why? Because in my opinion, the devil has his hands on all these things, and his aim is to wipe out Israel and the Jewish people. His aim is to wipe out God, right? And he wants to do everything he can. So he is kicking and screaming and causing all of this uproar against Israel. I mean, even the whole Ramadan, don't attack on Ramadan and all this stuff. Whereas we know from what happened on October 7th, Hamas didn't care what holy day it was. In fact, they chose one of the holiest days in Judaism to carry out their attack because they knew that they would have their phones off and they would be unaware and unprepared. Like, it's this like basically the devil is stirring up everything he can to attack Israel because it is this big propaganda war against Israel. And that is why these numbers are being falsified. Because if the truth was out there,
Yes.
The truth would be on Israel's side.
Amen. 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 So some takeaways, because people might be having discussions with those who do believe these numbers. Okay. One takeaway, the figures are from Hamas.
Yeah.
Secondly, the figures do not correlate when looking at women, children, and men.
Yep.
Okay. And the inconsistency.
Yep.
And thirdly, the other takeaway is the ratio of combatants to non-combatants are some of the lowest in any conflict in the world ever.
Yeah.
So those are just three things to remember, to take away.
Yeah.
And I think you summarized that really well, Alex, and the fact that, there is you mentioned about the spiritual battle and the fact that the enemy of God, Satan, does not want Israel to win.
No.
So we have to align ourselves
definitely.
with what the Lord says. Shall I end with the scripture? Because I think it feeds somewhat nicely into that. And the scripture that I felt led to share is Jeremiah chapter 5, verses 30 to 31. Of course, in its historical context, we understand that this is a message to Judah, to Israel, but I just want us to think about this for a moment in the present day and what the Lord might be showing us. It says this: an astonishing and horrible thing has been committed in the land. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests rule by their own power. I'll just go pause there. An astonishing and horrible thing has been committed in the land. The prophets are prophesying falsely, and the priests rule by their own power. And now listen to this next bit. And my people love to have it so. Okay, and what sort of spoke to me about this is that those who are listening to the lies, listening to the deceit, they are not rejecting it because it is what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Thinking about the church in this country, there are many Christians who are listening to things that they want to hear.
Yeah.
The deception has been invited because they wanted to believe the lies.
Yeah.
They wanted to agree with the false prophets. They've wanted to agree with leaders who have their own authority and their own power and their own system of teachings which go contrary to the word of God. It's actually the people love to have it so. The people are quite comfortable at wanting to believe the lies and the deceit regarding Israel.
Yeah.
They don't want to challenge it. And then this final line says, but what will you do in the end? So I'll read that all together. And my people love to have it so, but what will you do in the end? Ultimately, at the end of this course, we all have to give an account of ourselves to God.
Yep.
And I think about the words of the Apostle Paul, who said that I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. May the Lord help all of us to be able to live our lives in a way where we are not just wanting to hear the things that we want to hear from people who have got it wrong in false theology, false teaching, and when we look at the world, completely wrong narratives relating to Israel and blatant lies which have come to those that are acting in their own authority and in their own power and not in the authority and power of God.
Yeah.
When it comes to Israel, we have to have discernment that we will love to hear the things from God and not love the things which come from the enemy or from people who think they're speaking godly and yet speaking from things which are against God's word.
Yeah.
What will we do in the end? How we will respond in the end? I hope that at the end, that after we've run this race and we have kept this faith, that we will at least be able to say that we have done the right thing.
Yeah.
We have obeyed his word. We have been faithful to his truth. and that we have loved the nation of Israel.
Yeah. Very good. Very good word.
So, on that note, I think we should conclude,
Yep.
except one thing. We started with pin badges.
Yep.
We're going to end with pin badges. Because here we have a much, much better alternative to the pin badge, the red pin badge, which were worn by those that were anti-Israel at the Oscars. How about this for a pin badge? It has the Israel flag, it has the Union flag, and it has Christians United for Israel in text around it. That's the badge which you can receive by becoming a member of CUFI. It's something that we give as one of our gifts by becoming a partner, by making a monthly donation, by going to cufi.org.uk/partnership. Alex,
Yep.
It's been an encouragement again to have this discussion.
Yep.
Thank you very much to everyone that has listened
Yep.
and watched. And we would just appeal to you to please like, share, comment, subscribe, so that we can get this podcast and all the messages from Christians United for Israel even further. Without your help, we can't do that. But with your help, we can make a strong stand for Israel in this nation and bless Israel with the truth.
Yep.
So thank you. May the Lord keep you, and we'll see you next time.